after that, him telling me, hey, I think you need to go take some Bible courses and possibly, serve at the church, maybe in a small teaching role with the kids or something along those lines. That's when I started to lay out everything that I thought I was going to do, but I chose another route. And I began to explain my feelings to him about how I felt. And he said, well, Luke, it's probably because you're running from the Lord's call on your life. He goes, that sounds a lot like what you would feel like if you were running from the Lord's call on your life. This is a paraphrase of what he was saying. But so anyways, I told him, I was like, well, I think that I'm done running from God's call on my life. And obviously since then, there's been confusing moments. There's been moments where I still thought, what about this portion of ministry? Pastoral ministry, what about youth ministry, kids ministry? And things have changed, but that original feeling of knowing that I was going into ministry, I knew that God was going to be faithful in those moments. So my dad and my mom, when I was younger, they got married young. And so my brother was born 2 years before me. I was in 97. I was trying to think of the year. But basically, my brother was born out of wedlock, and then they were pregnant with me again. They got pregnant again with me, and then they got married while my mom was still pregnant with me. So the marriage for them in my life never existed because they were split. They had divorced before I even really knew. And so my whole life I had been used to them being apart and not really having much communication between both of them. And so my mom raised me for about, I think I was 4, until around 4. And my mom lost her job. My mom somehow got around the wrong crowd and started basically taking drugs. She was on drugs for a good portion of my life. So my mom was very separate from my life for a large portion of time. So one of the things I've told people before, as a kid, this impacted me very greatly, was I hadn't seen my mom. And my guess, as a little kid, time drags on. It felt like months that I hadn't seen my mom. Maybe it was actually months. But I looked at my brother. We were outside playing, and I was missing my mom. And my guess, I'm around 5, somewhere around there, 5 or 6. And I asked my brother, where's Mom? Like, I haven't seen her in forever. Like, I miss her. And he said, well, she's gone. He had basically said, he had given up on the fact that she was coming back. But I hadn't, my childlike heart didn't give up that my mom wasn't, I wasn't going to say that. I was waiting for her to come back. And obviously she was in and out of my life then. As far as my father goes, my father, from before I was born, was an alcoholic. And so a large portion of my life, I knew him as my dad, and people referred to him, in his drinking and all the things that he would do there, and his kind of more wild lifestyle. And so my relationship with him was not very good, because he was also very somewhat absent from my life and from anything that I did as a kid. And the same for my brother, of course. So for me, I think I grew angry for a long time at my father, just trying to figure out why on earth, even as a young kid, just wondering what was worth, how is this worth it? I didn't have a clue what alcohol really somewhat did to somebody as a kid. I grew more knowledge of that as I grew older. But I think that in every respect, my heart kind of grew bitter towards my dad.
So Luke, your grandparents stepped in your life, and they played a powerful role in bringing stability and love, faith, all of those things. So thank God for people like that and bridging that gap. But what did you feel like, even with them filling that gap in your life, that you lost, that you were missing?
Yeah, so I felt like I was missing a lot of guidance. As I mentioned, really having nobody to show me how to act and how to respond to people. And so from that, I harbored a lot of anger, honestly, being mean to people. I mentioned fighting as well. You know, I felt like that was just kind of another outlet that I used to feel like I knew who I was going to be. I'm the dominant one. I'm not going to be shown to be vulnerable in that sense. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm saying to you. I'm not going to let anybody rule over me in that sense. I'm free, you know, when in reality I was actually trapped. You know, I felt like I didn't have what I needed, and I felt like I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know where I was going in life. Later towards, you know, end of middle school, going into high school time. So even though I did have those areas of love, bringing me to church, giving me things from my grandparents, somehow there was still that void of, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not guided. I don't know, you know, I wouldn't know how to respond to Kevin in that time, or to Philip Beecham, or to anybody for that matter. If they were to ask me a question like you just asked me back then, I would have felt
Emotional
like,
maturity, those sorts of
yeah,
things.
emotionally, I was very unstable, and not knowing where to go and how to respond. I just responded in the way that I did know, which was almost being a bully. Really, is how I would respond. So I would have to say it would be in middle school is when the darkest point of when I realized what I had gone through, and I realized at that point that I was very angry. I was very mean to a lot of people. I liked to fight a lot. That's how I expressed my anger, was almost being like a bully, really. And I think 8th grade came, and I had a lot more time to think to myself. For some reason, I guess I started thinking more deeply at that age, and I started realizing how many people I had treated badly just because I was treated badly by my parents for so long as a kid. And then I'd remembered things from church that I'd been taught, nothing really specific, but I'd remembered, wait a minute, like, I'm supposed to love people. I'm supposed to treat them kindly. And so that was kind of a reversal for me going into high school, end of 8th grade, going into 9th grade. But middle school was definitely a dark time for me, being angry, bitter, not understanding why I'm alive, not understanding why they had to do this to me. And I kind of, God flipped the script, you know, towards the end of my middle school days. I think hurt people is so true, because I've been there. It's hard for me to get past hurt, because it triggers feelings that I've had when I've been hurt before by people, by family, by church members, previous church members is what I mean, actually. So it almost brings back all of those memories when someone chooses, in that sense, to hurt me in some way with their words or with absence or whatever the case is. And so I think that hurt people is very true. And I think that I have to be careful not to do that, because I can slip back into that negativity and feeling like I have to get my revenge and my vengeance because somebody said this to me or somebody did that to me. My childhood experience has impacted my children directly, in the sense that I don't care too much about making a bunch of money. I care about being there as much as I can for them. Being able to play with them, not buy them stuff, but actually be there for them, that's impacted how I think about how I work very, very greatly. because I want to be there as much as possible, because I feel like as a father, they need that guidance from the time they're born to the time I pass away. And I want them to feel like they're comfortable around me, that they can come to me and know that I'm going to tell them the truth, but I'm going to tell it in love, and that I'm going to be there whenever they need me. And that's how that has impacted me. Looking at one of my favorite verses is Matthew 22:37-40. And this is, a paraphrase, but it's essentially, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. I think Matthew leaves out one of those. But right after that, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. I always thought that was everyone else but my family. And I had to come back and realize that I had honestly committed treason against God. I'd created this image in my head that I was a good person, and thinking that I was so much better than my parents. And part of that making me whole was realizing that I was just as much a sinner as they were, in whatever they did, whatever they struggled with. And so when God came into my life, when God saved me, I had to realize that forgiving them was a part of my journey, a part of what God intended for me to do, because He intends that for all believers. And so having that forgiveness and realizing the debt that I owed to Christ and how great it was, but how Christ paid that for me, and then He says, forgive as I have forgiven, love others, love me and love others, as yourself. That helped me radically change my mind on being bitter towards my parents, and realize, what? They need just as much as help as I do. And maybe I can be the one to help them. That's not who I am. I'm not, I've been called to not harbor bitterness and anger towards people. And though that's a hard thing to do still at times, because I think of my past and my childhood and what it was like, I think that God has in many ways redeemed those relationships that I had that I didn't have, honestly, with my parents, to having somewhat of a pretty good, decent relationship with them. And I think that will eventually grow. But I've learned a lot of lessons from their lessons, I would say, sadly.
For someone who had a similar childhood and feels like I started off the world against me or on the wrong foot and never had the same advantages other people had, and feel like that's over and nothing good can be out there in front of me, what would you say to someone who felt like their future was being determined by the hardship of the childhood they've lived through?
One thing that's helped me is and I've reminded myself of this since about high school, beginning of high school, is to keep moving forward. Essentially is what I was doing was, don't do what you're a product of, but do what you feel like you need to do as far as moving forward. So
I'm going to stop you. I want you to say that again. Now that you're a product of, but say that again. That was great.
Yeah, don't do what you think you're a product of, but continue to move forward and doing what you think you need to do. So around 8th grade, 9th grade time is when I told you earlier that I was about to give in to the lifestyle that my brother had started living. I had access to drugs. I had access to those things. I knew that it wouldn't be a big deal for me to get those. And so I was, I was on the border of that. And I realized, what? That has brought my mom and my dad with alcoholism, and it's now brought my brother so much pain and so much hurt and so much, moving backwards, really, in a sense. That's brought them so much pain. And it's brought me a lot of pain. That can't be the right way.